Good evening, good night, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, our dear listeners. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to come back on this program of Where Power Meets People. First of all, I would like to start by apologizing that we got an abrupt trip and we never anticipated that where I was going, there would be disturbance with internet and electricity. Nevertheless, I'm back and ready to run. As promised previously, tonight we confront a question that shapes the destiny of nations or our country. And that question is about elections. Our main topic is going to be elections. And we shall try to align it towards what protest vote actually entails. That what is an election, what it can serve, and how it can serve the people, especially in a broken system, and also what protest vote exactly mean. So today is not actually a lecture as such. We are not here to lecture anybody, but it is a call for an action, a call to consciousness that we need to reawaken ourselves to the challenges that our country faces, especially when confronted with a bad system that prepares a facade of elections from now and then, which we call elections. So I'll begin by defining what exactly an election means. Typically, as most of the English words tend to originate from Indo-European or Greek, French, and so on. The word election comes from Greek term elector, elector which actually means to choose, to select, and so on. So whenever we go for elections as a democratic process, this is where we exercise our power to decide on who should govern us and who shouldn't govern us. This makes elections a very core element or pillar of democracy. Democracy, in the sense that a pillar of people exercising their power. Demos, meaning people, kratos, meaning power. Therefore, an election actually is the foundation of democracy. It's the foundation of people's exercise of their power. And if you go back to our 1995 Constitution, as amended, Article 1, it talks of the sovereignty of the people or the sovereign power of the people, in the sense that power belongs to the people. So when power belongs to the people, that means it is out of their will that leaders, governors, or the managers of our country are mandated or given authority, given permission to govern our country, decide issues for us. This therefore makes elections a very, very important aspect of democracy, the foundation of democracy. As Vladimir Lenin said that power or politics begins from the masses, not from thousands of people, not from hundreds of people, but it begins from the masses. So elections, therefore, is very crucial in exercising mass-driven power. That's what we call popular exercise of power, an exercise of populist or populism that determines the general will of the people. However, it's not only elections that the choice of people that determine democracy or determine people's power. There are two forms of voting that normally takes place because an election, the culmination of election is normally the process of voting or casting your vote to choose somebody. However, there is another element through which people exercise their power. When you elect a person, when you elect an individual who is going to occupy an office, in most cases, like in the liberal democratic system, representative democratic system, you are not going to directly participate or exercise your power. However, there is another way of voting which is characterized by direct decision making, what we call direct democracy, and that's normally called referendum. So, before we proceed to look at the importance of people power or democratic exercise of voting, it's important that we get to know the difference between a referendum or referenda plural. Referendum is singular, referenda is plural. And then elections. Then from there, we shall discuss why elections matter and why we should take the 2026 election very, very seriously, and therefore justification for a protest vote. So, uh, I'll request our handlers in the backyard to give me uh, that visual illustration of elections versus referendum. If you are there, I hope you are there. Get me that visual or infographic illustration of showing the difference between election and referendum. Yes. So, as you see from here, when we talk of election, what exactly do we mean? Here is a clear comparison between election and referendum, between election and referendum or referenda, organized for a quick understanding by our election teams, foot soldiers, campaign agents, and voters. In fact, all our members that are following, even if they have not followed this program live, they should keep on replaying this, going over and over and over, and compare notes with what they already know, so that we can organize ourselves and be ready for the upcoming general elections. So, what is the difference? What is the purpose? Let's look at the first column, looks at the features that we compare. First of all, purpose, voter roll, outcome, frequency, ballot content, decision-making model, examples, and implications of each of the two. So we have the second column showing elections, then the third one showing referenda. So the purpose, what is the purpose of election? The purpose of elections is to choose representatives or leaders, because not all of us can fit in the parliament. Not all of us can fit in district councils. Not all of us can be presidents. So normally, to exercise our power, because 46 million Ugandans cannot all go into those offices, to exercise our power, we normally select the, the best of the best to represent our interests. And that's what we call representative democracy or indirect democracy. In other words, you don't exercise your powers to make laws directly yourself, you pass through your representative. Then a referendum, on the other hand, what's the purpose of a referendum? A referenda or referenda or a referendum is to vote directly on specific policy or issue. For example, if they say we have specific articles in the constitution that we shall be looking that can only be changed through a referendum by consulting every citizen that is of voting age to decide his or her position on the issue. For example, recently we had the UPDF bill. Under normal circumstances, every citizen should have voted, exercised direct democracy to say we want it or not. But unfortunately, it was taken over by members of parliament, so we participated through on it indirectly. Then we have voter roll. What's the role of a voter in the election and referendum? Here, citizens elect individuals to represent them directly. In other words, you are exercising your power. In serious countries, to be on an electoral roll is a must. When you are not on, on an electoral register, you can be punished, you can be fined, you may even not get some services in the country. For example, like no bank can even give you credit unless you are on an electoral roll, on an electoral register. So citizens have a duty. To be a citizen, you must exercise that duty of election, of participating in elections to elect individuals who are going to govern your area. Then we have a referendum. What about the role of a voter in a referendum? Citizens make direct decisions on a specific question. Do we want multi-party system? We voted about it some time back. In 1960, I think 64, uh, there was a referendum about lost counties of Bunyoro deciding whether they would like to remain in Uganda or go back to Bunyoro. That is, the people exercise their powers directly to make a decision. Then, what are the outcomes normally of elections? Elections of individuals to offices. That's the main outcome. You elect individuals to go to offices. Then there is also, with a referendum, acceptance of or rejection. You either accept or reject a decision or a proposal that has been made. Should we have single party system? Should we have multi-party system? Or should we have a federal system of government? Or should we have a unitary system of government? Should we have a flexible constitution or a rigid constitution? Should we have free primary education or no? So that one, please bring it back. That one helps us to decide on the election process. Then the other one is, engineer, bring back the chart for readers to follow. Bring it back for the followers to follow properly what we are doing. Joel, I hope you are there. Joel, okay. So frequency with elections, they normally take place between 4 to 5 years, while referendum can be based on a political necessity. Is it necessary? Is it the time for it? And so on. Or is there a question that is so crucial that needs people to take decisions on? So in this way, you find that elections are more regular at a specific time, but referendum may not be regular. They may even take years, or they may be frequent when there are critical issues to be discussed. Then we have ballot content. You see, in an election, we have lists of candidates that you will see and political parties participating in them. Whereas with the referendum, a single question is normally asked or a proposal is made, often with yes or no. So voters say, we want multi-parties? Yes. Or no, we don't want multi-parties. We want a federal government? Yes. Or no, we don't want a federal government. Then there is decision-making model. Decision-making model here in an election, it is your representatives who make decisions, whereas in a referendum, it is direct decision making by the voters. Then examples. So we may have elections to elect members of parliament or president or local council leaders and representatives. For example, you remember in 2016, there was Brexit referendum in Europe where they voted either to leave the European Union or to remain in it. They remain, and those who wanted Brexit to exit. So that one is a form of direct participation by citizens. What are the implications of both? The implications are that elections affect the structure of government. They affect the structure of government, uh, the president, they affect those people who are supposed to fill other offices like councillors, district chairmen, and so on and so forth. Whereas with the referendum, laws or national policies are directly affected. So referendum normally affects policies and what? They directly affect policies and laws of the country. So now the question is, if you have understood that, that means that you should be in position to tell why elections matter. Because when you go for an election, you are determining your future in the next 5 years to come. You are determining on who is going to represent you. That means that it becomes very, very important to choose a person who has integrity, who can represent your interests effectively for the next 5 years to come. You are deciding on a political system. Quite often you hear people saying, I'm not a politician, but they go to vote. I'm not political, but you go to vote. Voting is the precursor or the starting point of all political activities. So, if you want to know why elections are very, very important, you will realize that elections define what we call a political system. In other words, determines what people want and support the government should do, and therefore it determines the output of goods and services the government is going to produce. So this brings us to understanding what we call a political system. A political system in a sense that the way our actions, our decisions in making, in casting our votes consequently determines a lot that is going to follow. Say, for example, between 2026 to 2031. Let's look here. Why do elections matter? If you look at this diagram, you will see that when we go for elections or a referendum, we are exercising what we call people power, the will of the people. Then we are inputting, in other words, we are telling the people we are electing, we are telling the policies we are voting on that this is what we demand. We want good schools, we want good roads, we want good hospitals, we want justice, we want equality, we want women's rights, we want children's rights, we want jobs. This is the time when you do this. And you support whoever represents your common interests collectively as a people when you go to vote. And how is this demonstrated? Those you support normally present promises or intentions of what they are going to do, they promise to do. And this is normally summarized in what we call a manifesto, or in what we call a manifesto. So, in the process, when you input as people exercising your power, you vote people, you approve the manifestos of political parties, depending on the environment where you are living. Because people in Karamoja may vote for the entire country, but then they will also consider circumstances that affect them at home, their environment. People in Busoga will equally consider their local circumstances as well as national circumstances that impact on their lives. So, in the end, the demands and support will depend on how a political party or a leader who wants to be elected packages his manifesto or promises, what shows that he is going to do A, B, C, D. To manifest means to show that I plan to do this, I plan to change this, I plan to govern like this. These are the policies we should put in place. So when people support them according to what they demand, then the government in office that they vote produces or makes decisions and actions. So the people you are going to vote are going to make decisions and actions for you. What are those decisions? Decisions in terms of policies that are going to be initiated by the executive. For example, the executive is the president and his cabinet ministers who introduce policies, actionable things that they want to change the country or how they want to govern the country, the vision, the goals, the aspirations, and then they suggest the laws and the policies. And most of these laws and policies and the budgets, the monies they intend to spend will go to parliament, and the parliament will approve them. Once they're approved, then the public servants who are the technical staff headed by the permanent secretaries, then will go on to implement those things. Equally, at local government also, the district executive and the councils have bylaws and other policies they can introduce fitting on their environment within their locality in order to ensure that they deliver services and goods based on the manifesto that they presented to the people. Therefore, the outputs are actually those things that we see, goods and services, which come back to the people. So you see here, demands go into what we call a political system, support go into what a political system is, and the political system produces outputs, that's goods and services. And then the services go back to the people who demanded for them, who supported the government. So in this understanding, we need to take politics as a very, very serious issue. You normally hear people saying that uh, that economics is not politics, schools are not politics. Don't mix politics with culture. Don't mix. No, that's wrong. Everything, every good and service are the actual things that define politics. So, in the real sense, we need to make sure that we participate in elections, we take elections very seriously, because in the end, it impacts on us very seriously. Now, having introduced all that, having defined for you what elections mean, and why elections matter, because they define a political system. They are the starting point, they are the pillar, they are the denominator of a political system. How inputs are connected to outputs, how the voters are connected to the voted people, those who are voted, how the population, the citizens influence the leaders and output. So when anybody relaxes during election and doesn't take elections very seriously, as we are going to see, it becomes very dangerous for us. Now, the next question is, Do free and fair elections guarantee democracy? Because we have been having elections every now and then since 1996, since the return of multi-party system, we have been voting. Do elections guarantee democracy? Do they guarantee the power of the people? Are they an insurance to your power that you will get whatever you want? That's the big question that we need to answer today. So this takes us now to looking at the difference between formality, because most dictatorships have what we call formality, fulfilling a duty, okutuukiriza emikolo, or in Nyoro what we say, okuyikiriza omukolo, to look for legitimacy. Some governments just participate in what we call a facade, other people say facade, of an election, when actually in the real sense, they are not committed to the results of the election. They are not committed to the demands of the electorate. They are not committed to why the electorate have supported them. Now, that's the question we need to address and look at it before we go to looking at why we should protest in our voting. So, do elections really determine democracy? Do they really determine democracy? Yes. So, we need now to differentiate between what we call formal democracy, just an official exercise that should be always done. It should be always done. It should be always done for the sake of it, when actually our leaders are not committed to it. So, what, therefore, is the difference between formal and substantive elections? Substantive elections mean that it's real, and whatever we do is concrete, and it produces exactly what our expectations are. That's what substantive democracy should be. Whereas formal democracy is just face value to fulfill the interests of what? Of the people. So, now the question is, what is formal democracy? Dimensions. Elections are held mostly regularly, the way Uganda has been having elections. Every now and then, we have been having elections. Whereas in substantive elections, the elections will be regular, but also with broader democratic norms. What do we mean by those broader democratic norms? When we talk of broader democratic norms, that means that every citizen that is entitled to vote has the freedom to vote, the freedom to express his or her views, the freedom to hold the leaders accountable, because an election period is a period for both civic education and a period for evaluating the performance of the incumbent. So, when democracy is substantive, that means that you exercise a free, that is, nobody stops you, nobody stops you from expressing your views. You don't have obstacles. The ground is level. If there are two candidates competing, every candidate should be listened to. Every candidate should have access to the media. Every candidate should, no candidate should be harassed. In other words, freedom is protected. But with the formal democracy, when it is just formality, you will find that the freedom is often omitted. Omitted in a sense that, for example, we are currently in electioneering period. By the way, I forgot to tell you that an election is not equal to voting. An election is a process in the sense that it takes long. It is characterized by several activities, as we shall see later, that culminate or that result into the final action of casting your vote. So whoever is preparing to wait for the day of casting the vote and then says that I participated in an election, you would have got it wrong. So the process of preparing your candidates, training your candidates, moving around the country, and educating the voters, which should be done by political parties and candidates. Those in opposition should be showing the loopholes, the weaknesses, the shortcomings of the incumbent. For example, like right now, all the forces of change, like National Unity Platform, Alliance for National Transformation, uh, People's Front for Freedom, Uganda People's Congress, and all others should be now moving around the country, educating the voters, because that's part of the election process, educating the voters on what they intend to do, what the incumbent government has not done. However, when this freedom is not guaranteed to talk, like you gather at Kavule, they come and storm you. You try to move up country, they block you. You try to access a national radio like Uganda Broadcasting Corporation, your UBC, you are stopped. You go to private radios, you are also limited. That means that freedom is omitted, and that's normally associated with formal facade type of election. However, with substantive democracy, your freedom is guaranteed. Freedom of press, freedom of association, freedom of assembly. Nobody comes to storm you and chase you away like at Kavle. This is what you should understand. So, informed citizens. Quite often, there is no democracy when citizens are ignorant. Democracy goes with knowledgeable democracy. In other words, intelligent governance goes with knowledgeable democracy. If the citizens are not knowledgeable, you don't know anything about why you go for election. You don't know anything about what democracy entails. You don't know anything about holding leaders accountable. You don't know anything about the difference between the state and the government. And everything is put together. You cannot exercise democracy. You don't know that an army does not belong to a government. An army belongs to the state. Police does not belong to the government or ruling government. Police belongs to the state. Public service does not belong to government. It belongs to the state. So if you can't separate institutions that are public institutions, permanent institutions belonging to the people as a state, then you cannot exercise democracy. So if you don't understand what constitution and constitutionalism means, I have heard very many people saying that, hey, we have held, uh, NRM has been very democratic because we hold regular election. It is people who vote so and so in office. So there is democracy. And also you hear people saying that the army belongs to us, and so on. If you don't support the government, you should not be served. That is trying to fuse the state, to mix the state with government. The state is there, it is a social contract, permanent and pensionable, and it is a public entity supposed to serve each and every person, whether you are opposition or whether you are in government. For example, the confusion now I'm hearing, not actually confusion, it is abuse of public resources, which I'm hearing now that because those who don't go to IPOD are going to be denied state funds, public funds. to organize for elections and so on. That's part of abuse of government, abuse of state resources, because these resources don't belong to NRM government. They belong to the state of Uganda. And when you don't know those things, you are most likely not going to exercise democracy. You will not hold government accountable. So it becomes very, very important. Then, therefore, citizens must be informed. Information, once it is controlled and it is skewed with propaganda, with misleading messages, misleading media, it becomes a formality, formal democracy. But substantive democracy, citizens are critically informed and engaged. So if you listen to most of the discussions now on radios and TVs in Uganda, they are just saying, what is NRA, what is the NUP going to do? They have removed them, they are denying them this, and instead of educating the people, they are trying to promote skewed propaganda, trying to paint a picture as if the noobs are uncooperative. Tell them that they are entitled, they are deserving, because those are public funds, and there's no law that they have broken by refusing. Because with democracy, you have a right to decide whom to associate with and whom to disassociate from. So forcing people to associate through iPod, when there is freedom of association and freedom not to associate with certain people with whom you don't ideologically agree, it's a total abuse of democratic principles. It ceases to be substantive democracy. It becomes a facade. Then another important point that we need also to consider in this, another point we need also to consider is the fact that opposition space must be widened. But when you narrow the opposition space, for example, if you look at opposition political parties in Uganda, they are not allowed to operate beyond Kampala. They have been controlled and circumvented within the boundaries of Kampala. That means it narrows their space. They are not allowed to associate. So in that case, we call it a what? Formal democracy. Even if you go into an election, it will not be a true election. But in substantive democracy, elections are open, spaces are open, they are very competitive and meaningful. So this exactly explains what we mean by election not necessarily delivering democracy. Free and fair elections. You may have even free and fair elections. However, you may have all these substantive conditions. However, when the people you have elected go into office, they will do their own things. They will legislate on what you don't understand, and they will not consult you. You don't know anything about the Constitution because of your ignorance, still your voting exercise will come to nothing. So we shall be talking more during this election period, explaining what manifestos entail. How are they related to constitutions? How are they related to your power? Can you have power without cognitive intelligence, without understanding issues that are critically discussed in governance? Can you have real power without political intelligence? If you don't understand what politics is, how are you going to guarantee your democratic rights? So those are very, very important questions that we are going to answer. Now, after this, it now we now go to what we call protest vote. Many people have been struggling to explain protest vote, what exactly it stands for. I have had a lot of attempts to discuss protest vote. Some have left actually the voters very confused. I always hear them discussing and so on and so forth. I've been wanting to explain this much, much clearly, and I think today is going to be the introduction to protest vote, and continuously in a series of topics that I will be discussing, I will be articulating and always aligning the issues I'm raising on why you should protest in your vote. So, what is a protest vote? If you follow me clearly here, the way I've stated it here on my visual illustration, I've said the protest vote is not just an act of casting a vote or a choice. It is the culmination of a civic uprising. In other words, the climax, the highest point of public uprising. When we talk of civic, we mean people's uprising. People come up and say, enough is enough. It is about who is voted out and which oppressive system collapse with them. In other words, when you vote them out, voting a person is not enough. You also vote the system that caused you to suffer to collapse with the person you have voted out or the people you have voted out. It is a democratic rebellion. In other words, you collectively come together, demos, with your power and rebel and say no. It's best known as people power movement, and it is also referred to as we have refused. In Lunyoro, what you would say, twangire, Uganda tuganye, Luo wakwero, or Swahili tumekataa. That is what a protest vote means. In other words, you say no to the bad government, but it does not mean that you don't vote. Why must you vote? And why do we call it a protest vote? We call it a protest vote because dictators, elites, oppressors don't like free and fair election. They hate elections because elections put them to account. Elections expose them. Elections endanger them. The election period is a period when voters get civic education. It's the time when those challenging them get the opportunity to expose all the evils they have been committing, the wrongs they have been committing around the country. So, incumbents normally, especially dictators, don't like elections. And that's why they will stop you from moving to the public. That's why anytime you gather in preparation for an election process, they come and scatter you. They come and attack you. That's why people who raise their voices to question issues are abducted, are arrested, and incarcerated. That's why they will not allow other political parties to organize well in advance. That's why they will not allow political parties to fundraise, because they normally want to bribe people, make people poor, and therefore make them vulnerable and easy to exploit, buy them with sackets of salt and so on. Now, when you come up with an exercise of mobilizing the people to say, no, we shall have our own candidates and fund them. We don't want, because the way the late Julius Nyerere asked one time, he asked one time, you are using, in fact, he said, you are using a lot of money to buy people. First of all, where have you got that money from? Secondly, okay, after using the money to buy the people, how are you going to return the money? How are you going to return? I mean, to return the money? where if you have borrowed it or if you have used your assets, how will you recover the money? So, in other words, someone coming to bribe you to pay for your vote is in a way buying off your rights, buying off your powers. And therefore, you will not hold the person, her or him, accountable for what he has done or what he has not done, for his actions or inactions, for his commissions or non commission. So if he has not participated because he paid you, he's your paymaster, therefore you will have no right to question the person. Therefore, dictators fear electioneering process, like citizens now mobilizing to fundraise money, either for National Unity Platform or any other political party they will not want. And that's why now they are trying to illegally change the iPod money into ruling government's what? Right to distribute, or making it their property, which they give so that you can have allegiance towards them. That's why they are disappointed when they see Nope not going there. So now, having seen all that dictators don't want free and fair elections, they don't want credible elections, they fear the power of the people. And therefore, that's why they normally make the election period very difficult. They deny people freedom. They don't want people to be exposed. They don't want voter and civic education, and so on. So, in the process, when you refuse to vote, like I heard some people say, but I know the no president was just tactical when he said that I will not vote under this regime. I think he was just playing around their psychology. But when people say I'm not going to vote, the dictators are happy. So when you vote, you are actually going against them. So what does this therefore mean? A protest vote means that you make sure you rise up against the will of the dictator and make sure you vote massively. Sick, whether somebody is sick, disabled, you make sure that every vote counts. You make sure you bring everybody on the voting day. It's a massive turn up because the dictator does not want. You make sure that you vote and overwhelm the rigging system because they depend on election corruption. In other words, destroying the elections system, bribery, violence, vote rigging, gerrymandering. That is, they make constituencies where they have no support very big so that very few people very many people can elect only one member of parliament. You will see people like areas like Wakiso or Honorable Semuju's constituency has several, over 400, I think, or over 200,000. 200,000 voters, whereas some constituencies in the NRM have only, or were designed in such a way that where NRM has strongholds, they have very many constituencies with even up to 2,000 or 3,000 only voters. So that's what we call gerrymandering. You play around with the voting boundaries, and the voter, therefore, the dictators are scared of voting. So when you turn up massively, first of all, they will delay the voting exercise. Where you have a lot of support, they will bring the ballot boxes and ballot papers maybe very late, sometimes at midday. You remember in 2021, some voting exercise started late in Kampala, when actually in areas like Karamoja, Rukungiri, and so on, the voting exercise started much earlier. So what you do, wake up in big numbers. The way you see this illustration here, this visual illustration, this what should happen on that day. You come very early at 4, whether the boxes are there or not, just wait there. Because when the time for voting ends, those already in the line are not going to be removed. They have to, the law mandates that they must all vote, even if the voting exercise closes, because they will be in the line. So vote against the will of the dictator. The dictator doesn't want voting. He doesn't want election. That's what it means by protest vote. You don't want me to vote? I will protest. I will show you I have to vote because it is my right. It is my democratic right. My life depends. My happiness depends. My education depends. My health depends. Good roads depend on that voting exercise. So if you don't do that, therefore, the dictator celebrates. He can easily rig the elections because very few people have turned up. We should make sure that if they say 13 million people are eligible to vote, let's make sure that as many as 13 million turn up for voting. And out of those, at least 10 million should go to forces of change. And that's what we mean by protest vote in simple terms. When you are confronted with a broken system, it does not mean that refusing to take votes. No, it means that make sure every vote counts on that day. So having defined that voting exercise, what it actually means, what therefore are we supposed to do as change-seeking forces? What are we supposed to do in the voting exercise? As I've said, protest vote is a mass-driven democratic uprising. That's what it means. You don't want us to vote, we shall come in millions. We shall come in big numbers. So what are the strategic elements of protest vote or mass-driven democratic uprising? The first one is massive civic voter education. I've told you election is not casting votes. It's not voting. Election is a long process. Voting is just the conclusion, the summary. So if you don't prepare people early enough, therefore, the voting exercise will be futile. It will not benefit you. So protest vote must begin with massive civic and voter education. What do we mean by civic? The public must be educated about their rights. You must be, for example, for us here at WPMP, we shall be analyzing manifestos, comparing manifestos. The other day, people were saying that Kyagulanyi is a foreign agent. I'm going to end corruption now. I will make sure that our GDP goes to 500 billion. Those are the things we shall be critiquing. Why are you remembering to end corruption now, after 40 years in power? So we shall be critiquing those aspects of the manifesto. If you are saying Kyagulanyi is an agent of foreign power, why did you accept austerity measures? Why did you bring liberalization? When you liberalized and sold companies, were they really bought by Ugandans? So who is more of a foreign agent than the other? So those are the things we shall be critiquing. It needs mass education. We shall be focused on mass education, and we make sure that we disseminate that information to dismantle the incumbent propaganda. So there must be grassroots campaigns to educate citizens on electoral processes, rights, and how their vote can resist oppression and reclaim agency. Through this civic education, you must help people to cast away their fears. People must become courageous, and they should know that actually these people, dictators, fear the people more than we expect. If you remember the recent traffic laws and so on, when people objected, how many did it take? Even a day for the dictatorship to change? It changed quickly. So unless we realize our power, and that's only through civic and voter education, we cannot challenge the dictatorship, because dictators govern us through fear, through oppression, through selling what? Terror. So if we refuse to buy the fear, we shall overcome. And that calls for massive civic education and voter education. And that calls for what? Okay, let's continue. Mobilization of conscience. changing the mindset, encouraging voters to reject bribes, propaganda, fear, manipulation. It is a moral revolution against psychological control and economic coercion. In other words, they are governing us through our mindset. We fear paper tigers. We think these guys are real tigers. They are actually paper tigers. How can 46 million people fear an army of only 50,000 people, a police of only 50,000? So they just govern us through our fear. We must create that mental revolution. We must create that psychological liberation from the manipulation of the dictatorship. Then we need also organized solidarity and pressure cells. You see, formation of civic groups, what the president of National Unity Platform said, Egali. When he talks of Egali, people started uh, vulgarizing the issue, calling it funny names. It's our duty to defend, to defend our policies, our actions against vulgarization to make us appear as if we are evil, as if we are dirty. So egali means just networks of cells or what we call pressure groups or interest groups that according to their interest, you play on their interests to make sure that they support the general electioneering process. So we should have professionals, lawyers, teachers, engineers, and so on, forming groups, faith-based organizations, regional-based organizations. For example, for me, I'm an advocate for federation. Only federalism can decentralize power and minimize corruption. So if you go to regional groupings and try to look at the challenges they have, why is Bunyoro having a delayed public university where other people have already had public universities? Why is oil in Bunyoro, the processing of extraction of oil going on without preparing people to participate in the sector? And so on and so forth. So when you do that, it prepares various groups from grassroots. I heard yesterday the president of PFF, Dr. Kiza Besigye, telling people the importance of grassroots mobilization. That's exactly, that was echoing the message of Honorable Robert Kyagulanyi, and that's what we should be doing. Then strategic infiltration. You see, we should not take things for granted. And I know most of these forces of change should be intelligent enough. There's what we call entryism. Entryism is a system whereby you infiltrate your opponent organization. You get a one Joel there, a one Peter there, and so on. He puts on the yellow. He joins them because they also do it to you. So the way you find that this international organization, spying organization, you find KGB is in CIA, CIA is in KGB, M16 is where they infiltrate and even speak their language, behave like them, and so on, while they are picking out whatever plans those people have against you. We need to organize for entryism to help us even contest in the strongholds. If you know that this Arua is for my opponent, I cannot win whatever I do, plan in advance, prepare a candidate. Even if he goes as an independent after nomination, he wears their colors. The best candidate, if it is before nominations, send your most trusted person who cannot be consumed in the process, contest there and grab the place. Then he becomes a sekikubo in their organization. After election, he starts siding with you, placing opposition candidates, sabotaging, rigging process. Because when they are there, they will learn how those people are planning to rig. Then they will come and tell you. They act as vigilantes and they will be courageous enough because they are associating with them, so they are not easily suspected. But it calls for highly intelligent people, and that's how you organize protest vote. Another thing is grassroots governance and polling cells. Organize leadership at the grassroots. Make sure that you have informal leaders at the polling stations to, to protect votes. But those leaders don't have to be known. They don't have to wear party colors. They don't. By now, you should have identified them. They act covertly, underground, so that they can prevent manipulation. Anything those people do, it comes back to you. I know this. Some of these things are already done. I'm just refreshing our minds. So then they can lead in the democratic defense of our votes. Then civic defenders and protection units, creating legal aid teams, fast responders, journalists, citizen watchdogs to deter violence, offer aid, and uphold transparency on voting day. Some of those people, your defenders may not necessarily associate, they should not associate with the party, but you know how you communicate with them. They should act like good Samaritans who pretend to be neutral when actually they are somewhere. Then strategic party alliances. When we are confronted with a terrible dictatorship and broken system like this, it's sometimes proper that we realize our limitations and be honest to ourselves and try to cultivate some level of strategic alliances in certain positions in certain regions. For example, you may find that you cannot, with limited resources, you cannot spread yourself thin throughout the country. You may find, I was listening to how many candidates have been nominated, how many candidates have expressed interest, and so on. Hardly any political party so far has had about 500 members of parliament across the country. So, what do you do in that situation? You collaborate and make sure that you create a synergy to make sure that where you cannot reach, another force of change can reach, ANT can reach, PFF can reach, NOP can be in a certain stronghold, then consolidate efforts using other allies. Then finance resource mobilization. Our weakest point, dictators normally first of all make us poor. So it is very important we mobilize resources as much as possible, both financial and material. Make sure a person with a bicycle, a person with a motorcycle, we contact people from every part of the country, every corner of the country, that on this day, your motorcycle shall be fuel, or if you are good enough, fuel for us, and make sure you ferry voters, and so on. So in that way, it becomes very easy to realize what we call mass-driven democratic uprising. Not throwing stones, not doing what, just to cast your vote and make sure that you are unbribable. You have cast away your fears in order to cast your vote with confidence. So in the end, what does what does it mean as I summarize? Protest as we vote. In summary, we expect everybody to know that they are going to vote because dictators, oppressors fear, crave, and seek to undermine free and fair, credible elections. They don't want, because they don't want elections. So, mafu, we are going to vote against their will, and no vote shall remain. we turn up in large numbers to overwhelm the fraud, the rigging, the gerrymandering. Do not leave anyone home sick or disabled. Let every voter be a foot soldier in the great fight for our dignity, for return of humanity, for return of justice. Let the villages rise, let the cities roar, the youth mobilize, and the elders strategize and instruct. Our voters and votes should not be just numbers. They should be a thunderous protest against corruption, abduction, against land grabbing, against deliberate impoverishment of the people. The 40 years of deception, that's what we are protesting. That's what we are voting against. On election day, we will not only cast our votes, we should cast away our fears. On election day, we should be able to stand up and defend our votes. We should be able to witness the count of our votes. We should be able to stand firm and protect our victory. On the election day, let the dictators tremble. Let them collapse. Let them fall out of office and fall with the entire system. That's what a protest vote means. So this has been an introduction to the protest vote. We shall be looking at now item by item. In other words, if we say we are rising against a failed state, what does a failed state mean? We analyze that. If we say we are voting in protest against corruption, what does that mean? If we say we are voting against a skewed economic system that is a rentier economy, rentier class, and therefore creating rentier space, grabbing our land, what does that mean? If we say we are voting against elite dominance, elite power, what does that mean? So our uprising is an intellectual uprising, an uprising for humanity, an uprising for biophilia. We want human beings. We want to be human beings because we have been turned into non-human beings. The vocation of the people is humanization. Our aim is to be human beings. We work together in groups collectively in order to be human beings. But what NRM has done, what this leadership has done for the last 40 years is to disorganize us, dehumanize us, make us feel that we are not human, impoverish us. That's what we shall be voting against. So, ladies and gentlemen, today has been the introduction of what election means. Today has been the introduction of what protest vote means. And a series of topics that will be following will be to give serious civic and voter engagement. We should discuss here. We should see how we can overcome the dictatorship that fears election, how we shall consolidate our ideas, consolidate our efforts, consolidate our resources to say no, we shall vote. You like it or not, we shall vote against you. Thank you for listening to me. Have a good evening. We hope to meet tomorrow yet again, and where we shall see the role of political parties in an election. I will in particular use National Unity Platform, what it stands for, its identity. Because if we go into election and we cannot talk for our party, we cannot define what our party is, we cannot define the ideology of our party, then we shall not be voting for anything. One of the reasons we have anti-politics is political parties come without clear ideologies. So we shall be discussing tomorrow what national unity platform ought to be from a supporter's perspective, from a citizen's perspective. I am a supporter and I'm a citizen. So, what are my expectation of the national unity platform? How do I understand it? How was I attracted to it? With that, I end my introductory presentation this evening. I wish you the best. Thank you for listening to me. I will check on the questions you have raised and try to respond to them. Thank you very much. Have a good